Our topic this week is creative ways to use transactions. And of course, transactions are used to hold your transactions for your properties, but there are some other creative ways that you can utilize the features that exist within a transaction to help serve other needs. So that's what we're going to go through today, okay? So the first one I want to show you is one that we've gone over before, but it warrants mentioning. Let me share Pipeline with you here. And that is using transactions to store your HR information or data about your agents or other users. And transactions work nicely for this because of the options that they've got within it. And I'll kind of walk you through those to see how that works. And feel free also, there is a help article. If you go to our help site and search for human or resources, you'll see it. It's the only article that comes up, but it'll walk you through the similar information about how to set up a transaction to be used to store your HR information. But the main things to note here are that you would need to specify a status and preferably a location, and I'll talk about how that's optional in a moment. But when you create a transaction, you know that you need to give it a status. So if you give it a special HR status that you've created, it'll immediately identify it as that HR transaction, number one. And number two, when you put that status, when you set it up and put it into the closed category of statuses, that tells the system that this is a closed type of transaction. The most important part being that when it indicates that, it will actually back that transaction up for the next monthly backup, right? So that gives you a backup of this HR document, excuse me, of this HR transaction. And then whenever, and this is generically the case for all transactions, whenever you add a document after that transaction's already been backed up, it detects that addition of the document and it'll back it up again. So setting this transaction to a closed HR status here, right? You're calling it HR, but it's in the closed category. Setting it to a closed status will basically get it perpetually backed up whenever you add new docs. Okay, so that status is important. It's also good if you need to specify permissions, an added level of permissions for this transaction and who can access it, to put it in its own location. Because as you know, when you set up locations or create new locations, you can give specific permissions per person within that location. So one person could have permission for all of the transactions, the HR transactions within that location. Or maybe you only want the agent to have permission, in which case you probably don't need to set up a separate location for it. But anyway, it gives you more flexibility as far as setting permissions when you create that additional location to put it in. Not mandatory, but again, that can be helpful, okay? And like I mentioned, you can give if you want the agent to be able to add docs to their HR file or just view them, etc. You can set them as an agent on the transaction. That way they can view the transaction, and then you can further give them permissions if you've set up that location to be able to do certain things within that location, like upload docs, etc. Okay. And then, so once you've got that this core transaction where you're storing your HR information, you can store docs, right? So some agent-specific docs, if it's for an agent. You name it based on the agent's name, and you can append HR if you want to or not. And then you can also specify tasks associated with this person's transaction. So it could be that you need to make sure you upload certain docs, right? Or certain tasks, maybe anniversary activity, commission information, etc. Right? So whatever you need to remember to do for this particular agent. Okay? And again, check out the help article if you plan on doing that, and it'll just walk you right through those same steps. Okay, so that's the first way. The second creative way to use transactions is to store rejected docs. Some offices will store their rejected docs or rejected offer docs. Some will store the rejected offers within the individual transactions, but sometimes when you've got a buyer and you don't want to create a transaction right away until an offer is actually accepted, you can store rejected offers in a single, transaction, right? And that will save, eating up your monthly quota on rejected offers that don't actually go anywhere. So some offices will create this rejected offer transaction and store all of their rejected offers in this one transaction. And then that way, if they need to find an offer, the naming convention that they'll typically adopt is to name it based on the buyer name and the property address. And that way they can use the search operator up here, the doc search operator, which is here, right? And then let's say search for Desert Lane, right? And it'll find that transaction or any others that have that in there. You can also within there search docs. Let's say you've got a ton of rejected offers here, obviously, you can search docs right there on the page of rejected offers. So if I say Desert Lane, right, it'll reduce it to whatever I've typed there. Okay, so it makes it convenient to find them, but also again, you're not eating up your transactions by storing your rejected offers that don't go anywhere. Okay. The next creative way to use your transactions is to store contacts. And let me explain what I mean there. Let me hop over to a transaction. So here I've got some contacts. Let me start by adding a contact here just to give it some context. When I add a contact, I specify a role, right? And when I do, I've got a list of those contacts that already exist that belong to that role. So maybe I'm selecting Fleming Escrow, right? And then I hit add contact. So there in 2 clicks, I was able to create a contact without even doing any typing. So it makes it obviously super easy to create a contact if that contact already exists. Now, if I'm an agent and I've come here to add a contact on this transaction, let's say I'm adding an escrow officer. The way that this list is populated is based on which contacts I have access to view on some other transaction that I have access to, right? That way it's not giving me any new access. It's only information that I've already had access to that I can access for security reasons. So sometimes offices will want to have that list already available to agents without them having to type it for the first time, right? And a way to do that is to create a placeholder transaction where you as the admin add all of your contacts to start. Add all of your contacts on that particular transaction, then add all of your agents to that transaction, right? That way, when an agent goes to add a contact, since they are on that placeholder transaction and that placeholder transaction has all the agents, they'll have access to all those agents and they'll appear in this drop-down menu. So it's a way of immediately giving your agents access to the contacts that you need them to have access to by having that placeholder transaction. Okay. Alrighty. So that's the third way. The last 2 ways are more generic, right? If I wanted to, let's say I wanted to give an agent a place to store information, whether it's docs or tasks or what have you. Some offices will create a transaction per user, per agent, and then give them access so that they can go and manage whatever store or storage that they want to be able to manage there. So just generically giving them a place to house information if you like. Okay. And then the last way is generic also, but just really related to whatever your workflow is. Let's say that you needed to, let's say you've got a weekly list of tasks that you do, or some other interval of recurring items that you need to get done. Creating a transaction to manage what you need to get done over on these checklists can be really helpful, right? So maybe again, as an admin, you've got these 20 tasks that, maybe 10 tasks that you need to perform each week. You can create the transaction, set it up so that you've got an automatic checklist that gets created, and then maybe at the end of each of those checklists, you've got, add next week's checklist. So then you just add another one for the following week, right? Just to keep your recurrence going of everything that you need to do each week. And then as you build up checklists, or even just one at a time, once you've completed them, remember, once you complete tasks, let's take the short one here. Once you complete tasks, when I reload this page, any checklists that are completed will automatically be collapsed. So that way they're already collapsed when you come here like that and not taking up much space. But you can still, if you want to, delete those once you've completed them. just to get them out of your way. But again, they just help manage whatever you need to get done. As you know, the checklists and the tasks, they've got their due dates, they've got the automatic workflow that happens, they've got the automatic addition of the checklist, so it just makes it seamless for managing your day-to-day activities, however they can be managed in Pipeline. Okay. You could just think outside the box. You know what features Pipeline has, what it can do, particularly for the checklists, what it can store, how you can store them, how you can communicate via the transactions, right? If you need to send certain things to certain people. So you can even just think outside of the box, what other ways fit my workflow or my office's workflow that would help me to store transactions here, not just the ones that I've mentioned, just anything that will help, where these features will help support what you need to get done. And keep in mind, whether it's the HR docs or whatever you're storing here, you've got all of these benefits over here, like the audit trail, right? Your transaction history, which shows everything that's happened on it, which can be really helpful no matter how you're using this. And same for deleted docs, etc. And so those are the several ways that you can be creative in using the transactions in Pipeline.